Hello again, everyone. Welcome to Washington Gun Law TV. I am Washington Gun Law President William Kirk. Thanks for joining us. We actually have some good news. Now, I want to put a caveat on the title because I think it can benefit all of us, but it's going to take a little while. But it has to deal with the issue of suddenly when you cross state lines, you seemingly lose your Second Amendment rights depending on what state you're entering. And really, is that the way constitutional rights are meant to work? Well, actually, there is at least one trial court now in Massachusetts that says, no, that is not, and has overturned the conviction for somebody who had the audacity to arm themselves while traveling through the state of Massachusetts. So today, let's spend a few minutes and let's talk about a huge ruling that benefits all of us. Okay, the case we're talking about today is a case called Commonwealth v. Donnell. Now, maybe it's Donnell or Donnell. I don't really know. Mr. Donnell, I apologize if I am mispronouncing your name. This comes out of the trial court of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in the Lowell District Court. This is a challenge to Massachusetts GL 269 Section 10A. What is that law? Well, what it is that if you want to carry a firearm anywhere in the state of Massachusetts, as you know, you need the government's permission. Now, that was obviously thrown out on its ass when the Bruin opinion came out last year, but that didn't stop the state of Massachusetts from prosecuting poor Mr. Donnell, who had the audacity to take a firearm which he absolutely lawfully owned, absolutely lawfully possessed. He was from New Hampshire. He had complied with every aspect of New Hampshire law. He was law-abiding in every way, shape, or form. He had the audacity to carry that firearm with him to the state of Massachusetts. He was armed. He was confronted by police. He was arrested. Under Massachusetts law, he is now looking at mandatory jail time. His attorneys challenged this law saying, hey, you know what? It's unconstitutional. We're going to read a bunch of the court's order today because this is the important thing, and this is why this can benefit all of us, is that this line of reasoning that the court used here is very sound, very solid. It is very succinct. What's going to happen is the state of Massachusetts is going to crap its pants. They're going to appeal this. This ruling is probably going to get flipped by the circuit court because we know how that works. However, this has the potential to ricochet itself all the way up into perhaps the United States Supreme Court. And we're going to see other challenges like this clearly start to mount in other jurisdictions. The reason for that is that when you take a look at the court's reasoning here, you will see that there is very strong legal grounds for these challenges. Now, the court said there was multiple arguments that the plaintiffs are raising here, and they included 1. GL 269 Section 10A is unconstitutional on its face. 2. GL 269 Section 10A is unconstitutional as applied to the defendant. And 3. GL 269 10A violated the defendant's right to be free from cruel and unusual punishment. And we're not really going to get into the last one. The court found in a footnote that, hey, we're not going with the cruel and unusual punishment. But what the court did find here is that, hey, listen, when we start analyzing these gun control laws under the correct legal analysis, as announced in Bruin, technically announced previously in Heller, and strongly reaffirmed in Bruin, this is what we get. There is no question that the holdings of the U.S. Supreme Court New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin has changed the legal landscape on how the Second Amendment of the Constitution is interpreted, particularly how it affects existing firearm statutes and challenges to their constitutionality. In fact, the Supreme Judicial Court in Commonwealth v. Gardada recognized for the first time that the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution guarantees an individual's right to possess and carry firearms outside of their home. And congratulations to the state of Massachusetts, once the absolute bastion of liberty in the year 2023, who have now finally have a state case law that says that the Second Amendment extends to the right for people to carry firearms outside their home. Congratulations. Now, despite the fact that there were multiple challenges and there were other lawsuits that took up some of the challenges, the court here decided to really focus on just a couple of them. And you can see where the court is going right here when they made the following ruling. What effect does the Bruin decision have on the status of an ordinary law-abiding resident of the state of New Hampshire who exercised his constitutional right under the Second Amendment while traveling in Massachusetts? The conduct of the defendant in the instant case clearly is covered by the Second Amendment. Therefore, the burden falls on the Commonwealth to justify the law, showing that it is consistent with the country's tradition of firearm regulations. But therein lies the problem, because when we start looking for those historical analogs, even if we start looking for something that might be remotely similar, well, you see, the problem is there is none, as the court pointed out. As the defendant in the instant case is not a resident of Massachusetts and was in compliance with his home state's laws on the possession of firearms, the Commonwealth needed to show some historical analog relating to disparate treatment of non-residents and must point to some historical precedent before, during, and even after the founding that evinces a comparable tradition of regulation. And the state of Massachusetts wants to rely on a case called Harris. Now, Harris was a similar challenge where the court upheld Massachusetts restrictions, saying, no, if you're from out of state, you got to jump through all of our hoops in order to possess a firearm, okay? But here's the deal. When the Harris court decided that, they believed that the right to carry a firearm outside of the home was not a right, but actually a privilege that was bestowed upon you by state government. Obviously, that has since been corrected, and as the court wisely points out, this argument is not persuasive because at the time of the Harris decision, carrying a firearm outside of the home was a privilege, and the Harris court held that Massachusetts didn't have to give full faith and credit to the New Hampshire laws conferring that same privilege. The Commonwealth points to no historical precedent limiting the reach of one's exercise to a federal constitutional right to only within that resident's state's borders. And that really is a question here. If you have a First Amendment right to speak freely or practice whatever religion, does that right only apply to you when you're inside your home state, or does that right apply to you everywhere? And when we begin to extrapolate that out, you're free from unreasonable searches and seizures in your home state and every other state. You're free from cruel and unusual punishment in your home state and every other state. You have your constitutional rights anywhere you go in the United States. But when it comes to the Second Amendment, apparently once you cross a state line, you lose those rights. The court was not persuaded by this and went on to further rule. The Commonwealth points to the Massachusetts firearm licensing schemes to argue that a non-resident can travel in Massachusetts with a firearm without a license if they are in compliance with the exceptions as listed. However, the exceptions miss the point of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment and the right to possess firearms is for personal protection, self-defense. The exceptions strip away the right by disarming the individual while he is traveling within the state. The Commonwealth does not point to any historical precedent for this. And so as you can see, the state was saying, hey, listen, he can travel through the state. Yeah, anybody can travel through any state if you got it locked in a case back in your trunk. That's the safe passage provisions as provided in the Firearm Owners Protection Act of 1986. But this is based upon state law, and as the court correctly pointed out, the right to possess a firearm doesn't mean you just got to get to have it in your possession, but you get to use it and have it accessible to you in the event you use it. The court went on to further state. In fact, throughout the Bruin decision, reference is made to ordinary law-abiding citizens when speaking of the rights under the Second Amendment. The logical conclusion of the Commonwealth's argument is that an ordinary law-abiding resident of the state of New Hampshire can become a felon merely by traveling into the state of Massachusetts. Given that there already is a federal law applying to the entire country as to who is prohibited from possessing firearms, the court is not persuaded by this argument. And as we know, under 18 U.S.C. Section 922, there is a long laundry list of activities that if you engage in any one of them, you are now ineligible to possess a firearm. And that ineligibility is in your home state and every other state. But what the court is saying is that is the sole basis upon which you can lose your Second Amendment rights. Merely traveling across a state line is not going to be the forfeiting factor. Ultimately, the court rules in Mr. Donnell's favor as follows. A law-abiding resident of New Hampshire who is exercising his constitutional right should not become a felon by exercising that right while he is traveling through Massachusetts merely because he has not obtained a Massachusetts license to carry, which now, under the holding of Bruin, has to be issued to an applicant unless the applicant is otherwise disqualified. The standard for who is a disqualified individual must be the same. Otherwise, a state may decide to impose different requirements on the exercise of any constitutional right. For example, some states can impose different age limits on voting in elections. And then in probably the best few sentences in this entire very concise ruling, the court really sums it up like this. This court can think of no other constitutional right which a person loses simply by traveling beyond his home state's border into another state, continuing to exercise that right, and instantaneously becomes a felon subject to mandatory minimum sentence of incarceration. An individual only loses a constitutional right if he commits an offense or is or has been engaged in certain behavior that is covered by 18 U.S.C. Section 922. He doesn't lose that right simply by traveling into an adjoining state whose statutes mandate the residents of that state obtain a license prior to exercising their constitutional right. To hold otherwise would inexplicably treat Second Amendment rights differently than other individually held rights. Listen, like I say, this is a huge ruling in the sense that this is not going to necessarily be good law and spread around the entire country instantly. But are we going to see similar challenges to this in other jurisdictions? We most definitely will. And we're likely going to see challenges to this in jurisdictions where the appellate courts may be more favorable to this argument. The case here, once again, is Commonwealth v. Donnell. We're going to link it up down below so you guys could all geek out on yourself. And we're going to carefully follow this issue because, like I mentioned, I think that this issue is really just emerging and we're going to see a lot more of it. Listen, if you got any other questions about this or anything else related to what's left of our Second Amendment rights, you guys should know how to get a hold of Washington gun law by now, but if you don't, that's okay. That information is right down there in the description box. Now, in the meantime, I do want you all to remember that part of being the lawful and responsible gun owner, like we talk about all the time here, is to know what the law is in every situation, how it applies to you in any instance that you may find yourself. Until next time, thanks for watching, and stay safe.